How are y'all doing? How y'all doing? How y'all doing? And
Good, good.
so
Well,
excited to see y'all. I'm so excited we make it through another week, y'all. We made it another week. And this particular month, we are celebrating Love Month. Woohoo! All right, y'all are out there. Y'all who are watching us are out there in those COVID sheets, and we know you are in those COVID sheets. So we're gonna talk a little bit about y'all to help y'all have some safety to this evening. So
Did you
we
call it COVID sheets?
are COVID sheets. Yes, they're out
Oh,
in these
wow.
COVID sheets. You know they are, Carrie. You know they are. But here's the thing that I wanted to talk about in particular, right? And so you guys know I'm a women's health provider. I take care of my women's out there, making sure they're healthy and strong and mighty and powerful and empowered. But one of the topics we often struggle with is when that sexually transmitted disease test comes back positive, right? And folks are in long term, maybe not so long, but some type of term relationship. And they often ask me the question, how do I even talk to him about this? How do I bring this up to him? So I figured we gonna talk about it and help some women's out and make sure that they know how to have these hard conversations. How do you have a relationship after one of you have an STI? That's what we talk about. And for those who are watching us who may not know what an STI is, it used to formerly be known as STD, but the powers that be decided STD was not an appropriate term. So it's no longer sexually transmitted disease, but sexually transmitted infections. And so we are going to talk about them this evening. And there's different types of sexually transmitted infections. Some are long-term infections like your herpes and your HIV, and others are curable with antibiotics like your chlamydia and your gonorrhea. But now we have super gonorrhea, so we'll talk about that too. Yes, Karen, there is super gonorrhea. I saw that look. She was like, "What?" Pause. So, what do you guys think? Like, what is the issue? What is the challenge with having this discussion when somebody comes back positive for a sexually transmitted infection?
Hold on. Are we giving people advice that's cheating out there to tell their partners how they got us this type of thing and need them to clear up and them to clear? Hold on. We helping the cheaters out there? Or are we
Well,
helping the
you
people
know,
that's actually
that's a great question, Karen. That's a great question. But it may not necessarily be a cheater. It may be the one who thought they were in a monogamous relationship. I see you shaking your head, Tiffany. Have you heard of those scenarios?
absolutely. And it's also those who have long-term, chronic STIs that they have to live with for the rest of their life that they have to tell each partner.
Yes, yes. And so oftentimes I will definitely say I have not had many patients who tested positive who were like, "Oh, it was me, I'm the one, I'm the cheater." I rarely actually don't have that often. It's oftentimes the shock, and that's a hard conversation for me to have as a clinician because um, there are quite a number of patients who thought they were in a monogamous relationship. So, and I know, Tiffany, you've worked with clinics that are particularly managed sexually transmitted infections. How did you deal with those issues?
It's hard because, I mean, I've had couples come in and maybe one test positive for HIV, for example, and I can't tell the partner anything, and they'll say it wasn't me, it was you, and the other partner's negative. Or husbands and wives, for example, and the husband will get it and say that it wasn't him, or the wife must have gave it to him, or even with like gonorrhea and chlamydia, they'll say, "Oh, you must have got it from the toilet seat or at a gym." Uh,
I've heard that.
them giving it to their partner, which we know is not the case. It can't happen that way. Um, but it's hard because
Can you,
with hip,
Tiffany, can you say that again for those who are in the back of the room? Can you get
which
them from
which part? Sorry.
the part where you said you can't get it that way? How can you? What way were you talking about? Can you say one more time?
So you can't get STIs from a toilet seat or at the gym, or sharing towels. You have to get it from another sexual partner that you engage in sexual activity with that has an STI.
Yes.
It
Yes.
doesn't
It it doesn't do what?
it doesn't just appear out of nowhere.
Yes, and it does not jump off the toilet seats, ladies
Well,
and
No.
Dr.
gentlemen.
T, you don't have to worry about having a conversation with me because I'm tearing something up. I'm throwing chairs. That conversation will be easily had, especially if I'm in a long-term monogamous relationship and I've been monogamous. No, I'm throwing chairs, tearing something up, cutting something
Yes, yes.
or
And
somebody.
I've had to, there's a heartbreak that comes with it, man, and that heartbreak is
Yes.
heavy. It is a heavy heartbreak for women who thought they were in a monogamous relationship, and the gonorrhea and chlamydia versus the it's usually herpes. I haven't had as many HIV patients, though that is very much a devastating diagnosis for many people. But the more common one is the herpes that usually hits people hard, and I think it's because herpes right now there is no cure, and even though it's not as dangerous per se as an untreated chlamydia or untreated gonorrhea, it's a devastating diagnosis for a lot of people. What has your experience been like with that, Tiffany?
It's hard because one, like you said, there's no cure and it's painful. It's not like HPV, like human papillomavirus, otherwise known as genital warts. It's something that when it happens, you know it happens. It's painful and it's so easily transmitted with skin to skin contact or even in saliva that is, it's easily transmittable and there's no cure and it hurts.
Mm-hmm.
And, moms can pass it on to babies during birth, or it can even cause death in newborns, blindness. So it makes it a lot harder to deal with because you have that, especially if the person wasn't faithful. You get a constant reminder.
Yes. Yeah, and I think I want to touch on a couple of things you said there. So yes, we do have the option to give women to have women deliver by C-section if they have an active lesion or prodromal symptoms, meaning you don't see an outbreak, but you do feel that burning, that itching. Some people have itching, which is sometimes why it's not diagnosed as often because itching is presumed to be yeast infections and things like that. But you touch on a really interesting point, and I do believe that burning sensation that comes is a constant reminder of the unfaithfulness or the episode. Because
Mm.
even if people aren't in relationships, um, there's still a level of trust. And that trust is broken. And sometimes one of the things I get asked all the time is, when did I get it? Who was it? And the difficult part is there is no test that will help me track down who that person was,
Mm.
because a lot of times people have do not have symptoms, and that's why it's so common, it's so easily spread. And you touched on saliva. Yes, having unprotected oral sex, if someone does have herpes, for example, in the mouth, and you have unprotected oral sex, you can transfer oral herpes, otherwise known as cold sores, to the genital area. And a lot of people don't realize that can happen. And so you're right. I think there is a psychological aspect of I don't want to use the word trauma because trauma has a particular meaning, but there's a psychological aspect to it. And I do believe that recurrent symptom does kind of hit home. You can't forget it. It's one of those infections that is like, hey, 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 remember me? But how would you guys recommend for people to overcome that, right? So people, you've been heartbroken, your trust has been violated on some level, um, and you have this constant reminder. So when that constant reminder comes, how do you help women? How do you deal with that?
Ooh.
It's heavy,
That,
right? It's heavy. This
that,
is why we talking about this stuff, because this is real life. There are people having these very hard conversations, and oftentimes I have patients sometimes who are like, they feel like they can't have another relationship again.
mhm,
That's hard.
mhm,
People who feel like they either have to stay with that person
Mm.
mm.
or they can't have another relationship, but there are ways to have healthy relationships, right?
Yes.
Yes. One thing that I have heard is this is going to sound really crazy. However,
Mhm.
there is I've heard that there are dating sites
Absolutely.
for people who have um for
Viral.
people with like herpes.
Yes,
Yes.
I
yes,
had never
say it.
I had never heard that before. And I'm like, is that a real thing?
Yes,
It
very real.
is really a thing. And I guess to your question, to your point, Dr. Moore, um, these are, but then okay, I have a ton of questions, but it's a way for you to find love again,
Mhm.
especially if somebody already has it. So that could be like an easy way, like a small solution to the grand problem. However, I've also heard, I'm not a doctor, so again, to the ladies on the panel, although you might find someone who has it just as you do. However, if you both have intercourse together, it could be two total different strands, or it could be problematic in other ways. So just because you both have um herpes, if you engage in sexual intercourse, you might be giving something to something else, or something in addition to your partner as well.
Oh, child, you touching on a few things there. So definitely having one STI does increase your risk of having a second one. So you still have to practice safe sex. You can't
Mhm.
just assume that because one person may share the same STI that you're safe from others. But also, you touch on something that is really so poignant, and I'm so glad that you touched on it. Yeah, for some people who may be part of the 10 percenters who have HSV1, the oral herpes in on the genital area. You may, yes, it's herpes, but it's a different strain. So if your partner has type 2 and you are having intercourse, you can acquire type 2 if you're not engaging in safe practices. And so, yeah, it would, I mean, it's interesting. I find those sites to be so interesting. So,
Positive.
like, I mean, from a psychological aspect, though,
Yeah.
you're on this site. Like, how do you sign up? Like,
I exactly, like, what happens? Like, what do you do? I just heard that it's there.
The
Go ahead,
one that
Tiffany. I'm
I'm
sorry.
aware of is
uh-huh.
called Positive Singles.
Say that one more time.
So Positive Singles, and you actually disclose on your page what, if you choose to, what STI you're living with.
Wow.
That's really a small batch, right? Like the ones that you live with, like the HPV that can cause genital warts, but can also cause cervical cancer, depending on the type. The herpes we talked about, and HIV, of course. Those are the ones you live with, right? The ones that are treatable. Gonorrhea and chlamydia we oftentimes talk of, but there's a silent one that ain't nobody talking about. Trick. Can we talk about
I,
trick? Trick is a
oh,
trick. Okay, trick is a trick because
Wait, what? What'd you say?
Trick is
Trick.
a trick. We gonna talk about Trick.
Oh, I've been out the
Ah,
game. It's so much stuff going on. I've been with the same person for about 15, 16 years. What the heck?
There's a lot going on, and trichomonas, which
oh, okay.
vaginatus, is the one that people oftentimes don't think about, right? And so it's the one that causes more of a vaginal symptoms that can mimic sort of your regular vaginitis, whether it's yeast or bacterial vaginosis. But people don't realize just how common it is. It's one of the most common forms of sexually transmitted infections. So pretty much going on these sites, if you are claiming to live with something, it would have to be one of the ones that are the aforementioned ones, right? The HIV, herpes, is there a ranking? Do we tend to rank STIs? Like I'm cool with that one, but if you got that one, I'm checked out.
Okay,
That's a,
so I work with kids, right?
Uh-huh.
So
What they
yes.
say.
So kids is like, yo, I'm game. If I could get rid of it, cool. So it's like a lot of kids
Oh.
are they don't understand the consequences of the four major ones you just talked about. They
Mhm.
only A lot of kids are only thinking of it in the sense of the things that you can get rid of. So it's like fair game is like, yo, if there's a pill for it, I'm cool, so I'm okay. But I'm like, no, 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 no.
Right. Like
You're
that's not
thinking
the
of just
goal.
the easy ones that you could get rid of. How if you can get the easy ones, youngster, you can still very much, if not easily or more, get the ones you're talking about, Dr. Moore. So I'm like, no, you still have to practice safe sex regardless.
Yeah.
So, but let me, okay, I got to tell you guys a quick story.
Uh-huh.
So I just learned something new the other day. So I date online. Okay. And I won't say the app because, we don't get paid for that. So Tasca, you just said something that I just found out about. So there's this guy, he was online and he was like, I'm a survivor of HSV2. And he said, LOL. And I'm like, I sent a message, what is HSV2 and how you are surviving? I thought he had cancer. I don't know. So I'm like, what is HSV2? He was like, oh, that's known as herpes. I was like, oh, delete, because I didn't know what to do. Where do you go from there? Because I don't think you are a
But wait
survivor.
a minute, but wait a minute, but wait a minute. But wait a minute, let's talk about it
Are you a
because
survivor? Can you be a survivor?
I am
No,
he's living with it. He's living with it. He's not a survivor. He's living with it. But
right.
he's a survivor of the trauma of it, right? Like because people are oftentimes so embarrassed by it. So I applaud him in being so
Yes, I respect
transparent.
it, but I can't do nothing with it.
I applaud him in being so transparent because
Yeah.
I think this is a problem that we're not talking enough about, and it's so stigmatized
Mm-hmm.
that when we do have those positive tests in the office, it's such a hard conversation to have. So how would you have a conversation with a partner if you came up positive? Like, how would you approach that? And some
I
are
already
reportable.
told
Oh,
you
we
I'm
didn't even
tearing
talk about
stuff up.
syphilis. I'm sorry, I forgot about syphilis. Let's
Mm.
add that in the treatable group. But how would you bring that up to
Your partner,
partner? Or how would
if
you
you didn't
recommend?
cheat, if you didn't cheat,
If you didn't cheat,
let's just put that.
Karen's like, can we just clarify who's cheating in this situation? But
Well,
if
if you didn't cheat,
uh,
knowing a black woman like me, I'm gonna come up in our house. I'm not gonna say busting. That's the wrong way. But I'm gonna come in the
keep
house
it
like,
100.
I went to the doctor. I can have the doctor record what he said on my phone to tell you what the heck I got, and I'm pretty sure you got it too, because I gotta take this medicine, and yeah. So it in my house it's gonna come out totally different, especially knowing that I'm not doing nothing. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And to your point, Karen, this is why I recommend for women to I give them a copy of the test results. I
You
give them
give them a copy.
yes, I give them their
So
copy.
wait,
Or they
Dr. Moore,
have
let me
access.
ask you this.
Hmm.
Why isn't herpes on like the STI panel? Because when I heard a doctor say, because it's so
Not
not
enough.
necessarily common, well, because
No,
it's
it is.
common,
It is. That's
it's
that's
so
part of the
common
reason.
and there's different forms, like everybody might have it and it's lying dormant, I don't know, but it's not on an regular STI
I'm
panel.
so glad you said that, Chastity. So this is why I have these conversations with my ladies because oftentimes their partner will say, "I have nothing. I've been tested. I'm negative." But what they don't actually ask is to see the results, and it's not a matter of trust. It's a matter of being informed as to what your partner really was tested for,
Right.
because different clinics do different things, have different philosophies. But in general, herpes is not one of the STIs that we screen for because screening has not been found to be as a whole as a population beneficial because it's so common. So
Mm.
we do not screen for it. So we test for it. So if you come in and you have symptoms, you're like, what's going on? Or you have a known exposure, you're concerned, we could certainly test you for it. And that's a whole other conversation how we test for it. But it's so important to literally share if you want to have a trustworthy relationships, you should be able to share results. Let's bring it to dinner.
Mm-hmm.
You bring your copy, I bring my copy. Let's do this. Or better yet, we go get tested together.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you
So
think, Tiffany?
I was going to share back to your question and how do you tell your partner? So I will share about me personally. I've been living with herpes type 2 since I was 9 years old. And unfortunately, I was sexually abused at a young age. and had to be hospitalized as a result. And so I've been living with it forever. So I've always had to tell my partners, this is what I'm living with. And I don't make it a big deal. It's, to me, it's no different than any other thing that you could get sexually. And I tell them in a way like, look, this is what I'm living with. There's going to be a time when we might not be able to have sex for a week or two. Sometimes I might take, there's medication that you can take every day to suppress the virus and suppress breakouts. Some people don't break out. Some people break out once a month. Some people might break out once a year.
Or
But
not
it's
at
a
all.
partner, so they know what they're dealing with and they can choose to accept it or reject it. But it's important to give your partner that option. I let them know, hey, we can't do nothing right now. So my partner's going to know I'm having an outbreak and they're going to wait or two. And if not, they can kick rocks.
Tiffany, you're so amazing. You are so amazing. Thank you for sharing that. How do people respond? Like what has been your experience in terms of the
Nobody
response?
turned me down yet.
Say that again.
I haven't had anybody say no yet. And and when if I happen to have an outbreak, either the condoms aren't always effective against herpes depending on where you have it. So I do want to point that out. But I've never passed it to another person because I'm safe and I'm honest.
I love that. You are so inspiring.
I have a question.
Sure.
So since you had it since you was 9, so I know we talked about transferring to your kids and stuff. It never got to your kids, or if you have kids,
I have
it never got. So it never got to your kids through a birth.
No, I didn't even want to take a chance, even though I wasn't having an outbreak vaginally at the time that I was going to give birth. I opted to have C-section. So I've had 3 cesarean sections. Good question.
Oh, so that won't pass through to your kids? Oh,
exactly.
Awesome.
You can pass it to the kids in utero, especially if you're having your very first outbreak during pregnancy. And if it's a secondary outbreak, it's a much lower risk of transferring it in utero. But for the most part, she's right. If you do opt to have a C-section, especially if you're having an outbreak, it does, and that's really the recommendations if you are having an outbreak of prodromal symptoms, that you can go ahead and have a C-section. And we do offer suppression as towards the late term, the late 3rd trimester. We do offer patients to be on antivirals, about to say retrovirals, not those, on antivirals for herpes, so that you're less likely to have an outbreak. And if you want to have that vaginal delivery, you can safely have the vaginal delivery. And it can cause very severe disease in newborns. That's why we take it so seriously. And sometimes, talking about kids, you guys touch on so many topics. There's so much to talk about. So one of the things that people, again, people don't understand that you can actually have outbreaks and transfer the virus to affect a different dermatome, a different area of your body. So if you touch your genital area when you have an outbreak and you touch your eye, you can have herpes infection in the eye. You can transfer it to the lips if you transfer from lips to genital area, from genital area to lips. So that's something people don't realize. When you have an outbreak, just be careful, wash your hands, don't touch your kids, don't kiss your kids. People are sharing. This is how kids oftentimes get it too. And I'm sorry that you had that experience, but I know you're an amazing survivor. But oftentimes the most common way that kids get, especially the cold sore, is from just adults who either know they have it and don't take precautions, or don't know they have it and they're kissing the kids and transferring the virus, either knowingly or unknowingly, to kids. And this is why kids have them. And kids, it's hard. They don't know not to touch there, not to touch here, not to touch their eyes. And I, have definitely seen kids with really bad ocular herpes. So just make sure that we take those precautions. But why do you think people are having such a hard time having a conversation when they are positive? Besides the cheating aspect. Look at your face, girl. Look at your face.
Because I have questions, because you didn't say some
They
things
must be
like
embarrassed.
cold sores and fever blisters. I'm like, wait, like what?
They're all the same.
Yep.
But I say they must be embarrassed about the situation. They haven't got over it, or, whether they gave it to somebody or they, tracked it from some other kind of way. they not at a comfortable space at that moment to let people know. So that's why.
Yeah.
Stigma.
How can we change that? Like, what can
Wait,
we do? Yeah, okay, we gonna let Chastity get it because we're on the countdown. So go ahead, Chastity, get in
why
there
do you use a breather for a cold sore then?
because it reduces the intensity of the outbreak and the length of the outbreak.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. And so that's a great question. That's a really great question. So the antiviral medication, some people know Valtrex because the commercial. Some people know acyclovir because it's commonly used, especially in the underserved population because it's more affordable. But they are not cures. They just reduce the frequency of outbreaks, reduce the intensity of an outbreak, reduce the length of an outbreak. So that's really the goal specifically with that. And to your point, Chastity, you mentioned something about the kids and them being okay with sort of the treatable forms of STIs. Well, one of the thing is, people can have chlamydia and not know that they have chlamydia. And there are devastating outcomes for untreated chlamydia. It can be result in hospitalization. It can result in the formation of an abscess. It can result in infertility. And this is where a lot of women end up with tubal disease and do not realize that their untreated chlamydia or delayed treatment of their STI resulted in their infertility. So, a lot of people don't take it seriously because they're not quite aware of those linkage. But one of the things that I think we need to do better is just have conversations when we're having sex with people. Like I like the fact that you're
Got to normalize.
say that one more time
We have to normalize it.
for the people in the back of the room. Let's normalize having those conversations because if you're really laying down with someone, you can't really talk about your sexual history.
Mhm.
You may
Right.
not want to lay down with them, or
That
you may
part.
want to get comfortable in yourself or comfortable with your own history. Perhaps that's the barrier. That you're able to have those conversations. Oftentimes one of the things I ask women, especially if we do pap smear, is not only how many partners have you had, but how many partners have your partners had? Yeah, I said it. How many partners have your partners had? Because we need to know that information. And what type of sex has your partners have? Do they engage in anal sex? Because anal sex you're more likely to transfer STIs because it doesn't have the same type of barrier. It's more likely to cause bleeding and injury especially if not done with wisdom, so to speak. And so people don't realize that. They don't realize that one of the celebrities has been again, we don't talk about the people, we talk about the problem. But there's a particular celebrity who's been very outward with his throat cancer as a result of HPV related throat cancer. So people don't realize that you can transfer HPV to the throat, and it has been linked with cancer. And also HPV is not just cervical cancer, it is vulvar cancer, it is vaginal cancer. And so we really have to be comfortable having sex conversations. We need to talk
This
about
needs to be
sex.
back into the school because I thought HPV was the thing and you can get cancer, not that it was a STI. I'm so heartbroken right now.
Oh, don't be heartbroken. Be liberated. It's
I'm
okay.
just
And
confused.
for women out there who have, because it's so common, there's lots of women who are going to be watching this video who do have one of the above, two of the above, three of the above. And to Tiffany's point, yeah, we need to talk about sex more often.
But why is certain forms, I am stuck on the cold sore fever blister. So
Uh,
why is certain forms more acceptable than like the genital, like why, like, because I know Tiffany was saying it's like it's the stigma around it, but like cold sore, like you could just go to the store, like, hey, I got a cold sore, I gotta go get some with like a breather or whatever. So how is that more like how did it come to like it feels like there's different tiers, you know what I mean? Of normalization or things like that. But like having a cold sore is easy to say.
I think because part of that stigma has to do with sex, because you could get a cold sore from sharing eating utensils or a cup or just a kiss, but there's a negative connotation with sex in general. You got genital herpes through some kind of sexual act, and then the cold sores, you don't have that negative connotation with it.
Yes.
Okay.
1000%,
Distraught, but okay,
1000% what
fine.
you said. And also I think it's because people don't realize cold sores are caused by herpes. And so until they learn that, then they're kind of like, wait a minute, what do you mean I have herpes? Because some people may have exposure, be concerned about it and want to get tested. And when it comes back positive for HSV1, they're like, what are you talking about? I have herpes. Like, what is that? And then you ask them, have you ever had a cold sore? Oh yeah, I've had that. Well,
Mhm.
that's what it is. And I think I'm so glad that we have this platform. We can educate people so that they know, because I think if we normalize it like that, well, cold sore is a form of herpes, then we can break down this general herpes stigma. And I'm so thankful that you shared with us, Tiffany, how to have healthy relationships after being diagnosed. And then also having that hard conversation after you've been diagnosed. Don't just get treated and lay down in bed and not deal with it again, because it's going to show up again.
Mm.
And the next time it may be something that's more devastating. And the one thing I want to mention out there for those who are out in them COVID sheets and are out in many COVID sheets and are not having safe conversations or safe practices, HIV is still out there and it is still very much prevalent. However, there's the option of taking prophylaxis. So if you are someone who, and you know how your behaviors are and what your preferences are, and we're not asking for all those details, we don't need to know that because that's your business, right? Tabitha Brown, that's your business. But what you do need to know is that you can take prophylaxis to minimize your chances of acquiring HIV. It is still a very serious infection. There still isn't a cure, and we need to talk about that part. Um, but there are ways to do things safer and make better decisions. Yes, go ahead, Tiffany.
I can't leave without mentioning U equals U. For those of you who aren't aware of what U equals U is when it pertains to HIV, is undetectable means untransmittable. And it's proven that if you are HIV positive and you take your medicine and you have so little of the virus in your body that it doesn't even show up on a test, that means undetectable, not cured. You cannot pass the disease to another person through sex.
And on that note, because she is slaying us with the knowledge, go ahead.
I know.
Miss Tiffany, go ahead. Such a great, and it's so good to be able to share this information with people. We want to leave, I know, right, Karen? We want to leave you guys with this. Have those conversations. I'm gonna go around the room and ask you guys to give one final closeout to encourage people in this love season, or perhaps a word of empowerment for them. What would you say?
I would
No.
definitely encourage people to be safe. If somebody would have had this conversation with me a long time ago, I probably wouldn't have so many heartbreaks and everything else that went on in my early 20s and teenage years. But definitely have a if you're gonna be grown and do the grown, have a grown up conversation.
And don't be afraid to ask questions and stand firm in your worthiness. Like, yo, if we're going to do this relationship, we both need to get tested. So don't be afraid to ask questions and know your worth and get tested, like Dr. Moore said, together, or bring your results on your dates. I mean,
Be
if
That's
you're
right.
if
real
you're trying to
grown.
if you trying to be if you want to cross that line, bring your results to the table. So
Be real grown, real grown. That's
yeah.
real grown people stuff. Come
I
on,
would
Miss
just
Tiffany.
add, especially for adolescents, get to know your body. So look at it, turn the lights on, get a mirror so you know when something ain't right.
Her
And
grandma taught me that.
if you're age 12 and up, you have the right to access family planning services, birth control, STD testing and treatment, age 12 and up, without parents' consent, for
Mm.
free by law. You can even leave campus, leave school, and go get those services that you need, and they cannot tell your parents.
Yes.
Mm.
And she said, free, y'all, free. The service
Free.
are free. You can see people like me in those clinics. All right. And I'm going to leave you with what my shirt said, rooted in love. So in all
Hey.
things, do it in love. If you care about the
Yes.
person you are laying down with, be completely transparent with them. It is their life. It is their right to know that information. And for those of you who are out there in them sheets, be rooted in love for yourself. Love yourself enough to make the right decisions and take the right measures to be safe for you. So